UBE Academy.
Thanks God, it's Friday and another opportunity to talk digital. Before we do that, today we have, of course, to celebrate the new year. Happy New Year to all our viewers. I wish that this year will compensate whatever has done the last year to us. Today we want to talk about something very special besides what we always touched during the last sessions of the last year, during the last year. And this is the human factor. Of course, we don't do this on our own. We have asked an expert on that topic, Dr. Dagmar Thien, who joined us today. Hello, Dagmar.
Hello, Sven. Hi, nice to meet you. Good to be here.
Thank you that you made it. You express yourself as a business coach and a technical expert. Can you please describe our viewers what they should understand under that?
Yes, of course. There's a kind of the two different sides that there are to me and that I'm trying to balance. So on the one hand, there's the technical experts in the energy industry. So I've spent quite some time there in physics and actually power plants business, where I'm now also spend some time in digitalization. And then on the other hand, I'm coach, which comes together also with being a mediator and helping people draw on their experience and also my experience that I've had within the business and outside in private life.
That's an exciting viewpoint, yeah. And of course, when I think about my experience about all these change processes I joined, I managed, whatever, it was actually always a misjudgment of the human factor, which delayed and complicated projects. So, what does your experience tell us?
That's quite an interesting way to say it, and really something I haven't thought about like that. Probably I would agree in a certain way, because whenever there are humans involved in change processes take a lot of time. So that's one of the things that always is underestimated. And then it does take a lot of communication, and the more communication, the more people there are involved. So most of the time, communication, we all know, is quite complex and complicated as well. So I guess probably I could agree.
Yeah, communication comes sometimes with miscommunication that makes projects very interesting sometimes.
Yeah.
If I look back on my experience as a manager, occasionally it happened to me that I wanted to reward someone by offering a special job, a challenging situation, and I always thought, okay, I would get back many cheers and whatever. And in fact, it happened exactly the opposite. Some of these people told me would like to stay with the way I did it before and let me alone with any challenges. What is your way to deal with such a situation where you want to reward someone with a special task and this person makes sure don't want?
I was just going to ask you, when you said, how do you deal with that situation? I was going to ask, as what? As the manager, as the external coach, as the person that you rewarded?
As the boss.
Okay. Well, in that case, probably I would just try to figure out from the other person why they're so, what is their view on the things, why they're so reluctant, or on the other hand, also why they are so, or what makes it being so content in the situation that they think, hey, everything's fine, let me just stay that way, because that probably would help me for the next time, seeing if it's really a reward or if it's rather a punishment, or maybe even to express, depending on the situation, express my surprise and say, hey, I thought you could do this. Why can't you see it yourself? Why don't you want to do it? because that might be something as well. Maybe the person just doesn't see that actually there could be something really nice and cool and new.
Okay, again, communication, yeah, and this is to openly communicate what was your intention and to openly communicate what was the fears which appeared. Okay, yeah, that's a nice tip. Another aspect is, of course, that some people have hidden talents, hidden potentials, of course. But they themselves believe they are completely talentless. What can be done about this? Open communication might be one thing, but I guess there are other potentials, other ways to get these talents to the day side.
Yeah, I'm sure there are, and there's probably a whole lot. And what I usually say is something really old-fashioned: try to go for some feedback. Because a lot of times, as you said, people don't even see their own talents, their own strength. But if you ask other people, what do you see as being my strengths? Then all of a sudden, these people hear, oh yeah, but you're so good at and sometimes they then just say, yeah, but that's just normal. Yeah, for them it's their strength. So that is something sometimes really helpful, to just try to get other views involved. So that's one of the things sometimes, yeah.
Okay, so one of the aspects is that people might consider their talents as something completely normal and unspecific. So that's a way to make them sure, okay, that's something indeed special, which I should force on. Do you have any experience with really hidden talents and how to get them on the day side?
Yeah, what we usually really do, I mean, what do you consider hidden talent? So hidden talent is something is that hidden to the person that actually does have the talent, but has never tried it or has never seen it. So, I mean, if we talk about strengths of a person or talents of a person, then really, usually it's there, and it has just been hidden to some other or the same person. It's not like it's completely hidden and it's buried and nobody has ever noticed, usually. So a lot of times, if you give people a chance to try something and they are eager to try new things, you can find it. But a lot of times it's really that you just talk, well, what do you do in other circumstances? If, for example, if it's a hidden talent, a job, but for example, you do it in your free time, you're the absolute Diggy expert and you do all your home automation and program everything yourself, but in your job, you're just sitting there and typing something into Excel, really boring, then that may be a hidden talent, but it's there. And you know it yourself, just your manager doesn't know it maybe.
It takes place at home. Nobody can see it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's indeed some of the typical experiences of a boss in a bossy situation. One thing is, if we have calm times and everything is fine, and you can work on your Excel sheets in the office and work on your home automation at home. But what about crisis? That's a very specific situation. We say pressure makes diamonds on one hand, but what about the talents in crisis? How can you develop talents urgently when it is needed in a crisis situation?
Well, I guess that probably depends a lot on the talent you talk about and on the person itself. If you are really in the crisis, directly in it, it's kind of hard to find your talents, because usually you're just trying to stay with your mouth above waterline. So it's hard to find your talents. But if you just take the time in general to have feedback about your strengths, and for example, what we do in strength coaching, that we specifically work with a tool and help people to find their own strength with feedback from others, especially anonymous feedback, then you at least have an idea of kind of your set of strengths that you can draw upon. And when you're then in a specific crisis, then you can actually take a look at what is actually now the main problem or the most urgent problem, and how can I tackle that, and which of my strengths can I actually use to get on top of that crisis and to lead my own life and the situation, as opposed to being hurried into something that I cannot control.
So that's a call for kind of preventive action. Do I understand it correctly?
It's usually really helpful, because in the crisis itself, most of the time you just have to kind of find out, can I get back on the ground? Can I sort my thoughts? and can I really, may sound old-fashioned again, just look at the facts that there are, sort them, and then take a look at what is the most urgent thing, and then just go step by step. And there may be some really simple things, and maybe some more complicated ones, but in that end, it's really just, even in a crisis, you can sit down, maybe even take somebody else to help you along, and try to sort these things, and what is the most urgent, what do I have to take a look at, and try to find. Most people can actually find their way out of a crisis, maybe need a bit of help, but they usually find their way if they get the sense of, okay, sit back, take a look at this thing, and analyze what's going on here.
So that's a general suggestion, and to say, okay, even if a crisis, don't panic, drink a tea and carry on. That's yeah, very powerful people who suggested that way. What can a company do in a preventive context? Is it okay to sum up, to identify talents beforehand? But how can they organize it? Is this a systematical process which you lead through the whole company during peaceful times before the crisis comes, or what is your suggestion for companies?
Yeah, I mean, anytime, basically. We work with a tool which is called the Strength Compass, and that basically is really an anonymous feedback from others on your specific strengths, and you also put in kind of a self-assessment on your own strengths. And then you compare these, and there's a couple of very specific combinations, for example, that you may see. A lot of times people then say, wow, this is what other people see in my strengths. And oh, this is really the same as I see, or sometimes there's a lot of a difference. And then there are some very specific combinations that hint at, okay, this person would be perfect in a very detailed job, maybe in an R&D area, or this combination of strengths would be very good for somebody who wants to be open and in discussion with a lot of other people, maybe in a sales environment, or rather in a person that likes to decide and make clear communication and presentations that could rather go towards the typical management kind of career. So these kind of things, I mean, we work with this kind of tool, and we usually try to do it in groups. I mean, you can either do it just as one person, or you can do it within teams, where you then just say, okay, within the team, are all of the people that we have in the team in the right position based on the strengths? And then you can work even within the team and say, oh, I didn't even know you had that specific strength because that was hidden to me. But now that I know about it, well, maybe we can do it the other way around. And then because it's a hidden feedback, in hopefully not crisis time, people take a bit of a time to get
prevention.
Yeah, exactly, to give you that feedback, and you take it from different people. So not only your people, for this example, in your own team, but maybe your neighbors, your sports colleagues, or your friends that you do whatever else in your spare time. So you get a nice, broad and very differentiated image of your strengths. And that then helps even in crisis times when you know, oh, this person is very, very fact-based in their decision in their life, then that may be very helpful when you have a crisis. Then you rather go to these people to try to figure out, okay, what are the first things to do? What's the most urgent things to do? And then you have other people which are very good maybe in communication and being very empathetic. And then you know, okay, these are the ones that you may need to communicate to the others how to get through the system. So then you can really try to find, for specific questions, for specific tasks, the right people according to their strengths. And that usually helps if people, I mean, it's always the same question, what do I do? Do I even encourage my strengths, or do I try to work and improve my weaknesses? So in the end, really what happens mostly is if you look at your strengths that you really have, and you work on these strengths and specifically look, okay, this is a strength that may help me work with this problem, and this is another strength that actually helps me to balance out so I don't overdo on this end. For example, maybe, well, you need to be very creative to solve a problem, but if you're an extremely creative person, you may find all kinds of ideas, but they just don't go with a specific one problem. But if you happen to be also focused, that may be quite helpful because you're very creative and you can use that strength of being focused to stay creative on that issue. for example. And that's what we usually work on with teams and try to find these very helpful strength combinations with people and teams.
It sounds a bit like talent mining in your stuff. Is this the right picture from your viewpoint?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about staff, but yeah, you could kind of see it that way. Talents, strength, that are very similar things. Yeah. I mean, usually if you're a very good musician, you're quite talented in that area, so you would train a lot more on that end. But you maybe would not even, if you're, for example, a violin player, you might not think about starting a boxing career.
Oh, well, it depends on my experience. Sometimes people are in good positions, not because they are qualified for that position, but because they are qualified on networking, for example. But that's a different story, I guess.
Which can be helpful in some positions as well.
Oh, yes, definitely. Yeah, sure. This is
which is actually a great strength.
It's one of the most valuable talents, specifically when you're selling. But that's a different story, definitely. My question is more, let's say, a handy question for companies. Should they put some department together to do a workshop on that talent, or is your experience more that you should mix it with several department members or even several companies? What's the best result when you're on the way to mine some talents in your team?
I guess it, as always, it depends.
Okay.
I mean, if you're looking at your team and you want to set up your team that you just have, then just work within that team. But if you're looking to maybe, if you're considering a large change process somewhere within a company, then it may be quite helpful to look at these strength workshops within a team, for example, and work out within that team what would be best. And then may even come about that you find out, well, this person has strengths which would be much better used in other places. So even if you work for a large if you work for a company, you could, for example, also look at there's something like a company compass, which you could also use to look at the specific values and strength within your company, and then you could see, do these strengths of the people align with the companies? That's something you could do. But usually what I would prefer is really look at smaller teams, because then you can have a more detailed view at the people. You get feedback from within the team, from outside the team. You can arrange within the team and see, well, maybe for that person, it's better to look into a different area. And if you then, for example, look at this same thing in, let's say, a larger area of the company, 3, 5, 10, 20 teams, then you might even be able to say, well, now that we've looked at these strengths, we have kind of a pool of these strength compasses. We can even see, well, maybe here comes a project in a completely different area which needs these strengths, and then you could use the people there.
Oh, that's an important aspect, of course. We are not talking about crisis only. Sometimes the opportunity makes it necessary to get some talents immediately on work.
And the crisis is also an opportunity as well. It's just kind of thing, just just a different look at the crisis.
Yeah, okay. From one, yeah, I can follow it. Yeah, it's a good viewpoint. Yeah, indeed. One aspect which I think it's an important when we talk about talents, career opportunities, crisis, chances, whatever, is trust. What is the trust level if you want to force people to talk about their talents and maybe even their weaknesses? How can you create trust, and what kind of trust do you need for that?
Well, I think talking about weaknesses is always hard unless you have spent quite some time and you feel comfortable in the area. The nice part about talking about your strengths and talents is that usually people like to talk about it anyways. So that makes it a lot easier talking about your strengths. And as I said, when we work with these anonymous feedbacks from others, then they can obviously trust that things go right, because they can only write their idea of your strengths. And they specifically know that nobody will ever be able to say, well, this is Mr. Miller and this is Anita who gave me this feedback. And on the other hand, the person who receives all this feedback gets an idea of what other people see, and you're kind of safe in that area because you always know that they can only choose strengths. So they will not be able to say, oh yeah, that person is really bad at presenting something, because it's not a strength to be bad at something. It's a strength to be a good presenter. So maybe nobody is going to choose that your strength is presenting. But if your strength is being creative, they would rather choose, yeah, you're creative. So it's kind of an inherent trust that's there because you only talk about positive things. So you have kind of a positive set in the entire discussion. So that kind of goes a bit around this trust, which is of course important when you talk about rather personal things, but it kind of gives a positive turn to it. So people like to talk about it. It's a bit easier and kind of bypasses this trust topic.
So offering a positive feedback, yeah. Do you consider external neutral coaches in such a situation as helpful, or is this more counterproductive because they have to learn about the company, they don't know what they are doing and so forth?
Well, in specific cases, talking about strengths in the team and finding how people could work with their strengths, I find it quite helpful to have neutral other people looking at it. Maybe that also part of my being a mediator, that I see sometimes a neutral person is very helpful because you are on the outside, and when it just comes about who has what strengths, what is a specific task that needs to be solved, what kind of strengths would be needed. If you look from the outside, you're not biased by having heard anything in the past about any of these people. If you're within the team, within the company, then usually you've heard some kind of rumors, oh, no, you never work with that person. These kind of. So yes, I think it's quite helpful because you don't really need to know specifically about the company or specifically about the task, but you basically need to know, well, you as person X have a specific challenge, which you define yourself or which the area has defined. And you work with the team, what type of strengths that you have or that the team has would be helpful. And what strength would be helpful. So if you have a specific, let's use creativity again. You need creativity to solve this issue, and you already have that as your strength, but maybe it's not really pronounced yet, but you have it already. Then you can say, well, work on that, use some techniques, and be aware of the fact that you are very creative. So you can use it to solve the problem. And then what other strengths, if you look at the strength compass of that person, would be helpful to not overdo, for example, deviate from the actual question, well, stay focused, that's good. And then you can look at the other strengths which are there, which are always there, which are very pronounced in the person, for example, to also look at the specific problem. And you work with a team and you find the solution in the team. So the external coach can just work with what you actually see there in the feedbacks, rather than with also an image of the person that has been in the mind from some experiences in the past.
You mentioned several times the strength compass. It seems to me like as if this is a very powerful tool. Can you give a little brief description of what this, how this tool does work and how does it look like?
Yes, sure. So, I mean, there's a lot of tools out there which basically go to try to find out your strengths. A lot of them are kind of like questionnaires that you go through where you give some specific type of answers. But the really nice thing here is it really is, it's an app or it's a web page where you choose, you have 4 areas with a number of strengths which are aligned to that area. For example, how do you appear? Your appearance could either be, for example, a rather sporty or a very relaxed person. And there's a whole number of basically just single words, with some short expressions, what that means, explanation. And you can choose up to 5 in each area for yourself. And then you invite other people to give you feedback. And that same thing. So usually just giving a feedback or putting in these choosing these strengths takes, depending on how much time you want to invest, but you can do it within 10 to 15 minutes. So it's rather quickly done. And if you have a lot of people, you can group them. For example, say, this is my family, this is friends, this is colleagues. And then you get a set of these strengths back, and you get the most pronounced strengths that is shown in the end in the evaluation for each of these 4 areas. And so then you can work with this and see, okay, this is a very pronounced, or you have 2 or 3 very pronounced strengths in each of the areas. And what I think is really nice is that it uses the feedback from others, the anonymous feedback from others, and uses your own view, but it's really just more than your own view, because other people look at it as well, who have seen you in different areas, who have experienced you in different areas of life. And then you can see, are there specific combinations? The tool even actually shows some very specific or typical combinations which are good for specific types of tasks. And then once you have your own strength compass, which you can look at always, for example, if you have a new task to solve, then that's one thing. But then there's also an app that goes with it, where there's a couple of, let me say, typical workplace issues. For example, what do I do as a manager if I have to talk to a person about a critical topic? And then that chooses which of your strengths would be helpful and gives you some hints. So in that case, that is really nice, because then you can look at now I have this issue, what would be helpful? And you can use it actually right there and then. And one thing is learning something in theory, but the other thing is getting a hint to actually work on it, because then you can learn and improve on it.
It helps you to reduce some uncertainty before you go into fight. Yeah, I guess that's an interesting tool, and I think it's a fascinating, obviously good idea to mine talents in your own team, preventive, and to use these kind of tools. Another question came up to my mind. I guess. Well, you're working in interesting fields, and I guess it's not a boring job you are doing. Precisely, I know it's not a boring job that you're doing. How did you collect this kind of knowledge?
Well, I should just say life happens. So really, yeah, life. A lot of these things is just, of course, I started out in the beginning with my very technical career based on my original studies and my physics, but then life happens. So I had my main crisis a couple of years ago and went through that, learned a lot from it, and then I became curious about, well, there should be some balance to the very, very interesting technical part in my life. And I became interested and looked around. Coaching, got quite some information there. And then life happened again. I talked to a friend. She said, yeah, I talked to my manager, and he gave me a couple of links. And so I found about a Master of Mediation study at university. I thought, this is really interesting. And so things came together, and then I found out that it even interlinks at some places. And it's just really balancing the both sides, my technical interest and the more analytical and technical end, together with the communication and analytical and supporting people in their development on the other side. Life happens. And it's good to grab chances when they come by.
Oh, I guess so. That's I think the most positive thing you can reach if you see people growing because of your input. Great. Do you have also some experience on the negative way because of this knowledge, or is it always positive to have this knowledge?
That's the thing with balance. There's always pros and cons. Right? So yeah, of course. Well, I guess I try to see it always positive, because that makes things easier for me. So I am the way I am, and I'm interested in these many things. But of course, then there's sometimes words like, oh yeah, aren't you overqualified for something? Or you don't really go into depth of something if you have all of these different things. But yeah, having, as you said, all of this knowledge, is that maybe hindering? Well, for other people, it may be hindering to have less knowledge. So it's just a different type of challenge, I guess.
Interesting way to see it. Yeah, I like that very much. And Dagmar, at the end of our show, we traditionally offer our guests 60 seconds, which they should or can use to talk about whatever they would like to have to talk in beforehand. So would you like to use our 60 seconds for Dagmar?
Sure, of course.
So please.
Thanks. Now I need to. Where's the countdown? No, what I would really like to say is that whenever you're in a crisis, it may be hard to find your strengths, but it's still possible to do it. And actually, even looking at something like a strength compass can be quite helpful, even in crisis. If you just happen to be in a very smooth situation, it may be quite helpful to look at your strengths so that you have them at hand when there's a crisis coming about, which makes it a lot easier to come out of this crisis. So I can just ask people, go find your strengths, go find your talents, and work with them, because that's going to help you so much.
Great. I don't know if it's even 60 seconds, but however, we learned a lot, I guess. I did, at least, and it's a lot about talent mining and stuff. And I know that there are some tools which brings you into the deeper talents. Thank you very much, Dagmar, for joining us. Have a nice day. Thank you very much for our listeners to listen to us, and see you next week again for the Friday Chill Out. Bye bye. Stay healthy.
Bye.